Happy 4th of July. Today is a day to put aside the partisan bickering and be a patriot with our fellow Americans. Wait a second. This is UUCP. Did you really think that we would be able to do that? Just a few weeks ago, Congress passed a bill to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. Yay! Finally, on the federal level, we have recognition for righting a wrong and making steps in the right direction, especially since 49 states observe Juneteenth already, including Arizona, which makes it so weird that now our same state, along with 20 others, are trying to pass bills to make sure that teachers cannot truly teach the significance of it. Yes, I am here to talk about critical race theory, but don't click off the Zoom call yet. I know as a liberal congregation, many of you may agree with what I have to say on the subject, but many of you may not. Today, I ask for you to listen to my experience as a student. And just for context, I know that I am a white young adult. I have not lived through the prejudice that fuels these bad faith arguments. I try my best to empathize, but I will never, ever know the pain that comes along with this topic. As a recent high school graduate, I feel like today would be a good day to reflect on my historical education, or lack thereof. I went to a public high school and took all AP history classes, including AP US history. Considering that it is supposed to be a college-level course, I thought that we went pretty in-depth on difficult topics like Executive Order 9066 and the Trail of Tears. I took this class in my junior year of high school, and though the pandemic cut short a good chunk of material after World War II, I felt that I had learned quite a bit about how America was established and the people our government had to step on to get where it was now. Last summer, though, after the murder of George Floyd, I learned quite a bit about what I did not learn. Raise your hand if the first time you heard about the Tulsa Race Massacre was the summer of 2020. Keep your hand raised if the first time you ever heard about Black Wall Street was also the summer of 2020. I know for many, as well as myself, it was a bit jarring to realize that nobody who had power over my education told me about a thriving Black business sector being destroyed over a confrontation in an elevator. How did we go so wrong? Any Black history I learned was sugar-coated, and I never learned any examples of Black excellence. And pretty much any other minority never got a mention. No one ever talked about the origins of the term Asian American, but we sure learned a lot about the differences between Italian and Irish Americans. No one taught me the political strategy to unite Chinese, Filipino, and Japanese Americans, like they taught the political strategy to end the Vietnam War. I distinctly remember being taught that during the Civil War, we labeled battles in which Indigenous Americans lost as battles, and ones in which white Americans lost as massacres. And it hasn't changed. My textbook, The American Pageant, still had them named that way. The language is subtle, but the message is loud and clear. Massacre sounds brutal and unjustified. Battle sounds like an inevitable part of warfare. You can delegitimize the actions of one group while upholding the same actions of another in order to maintain oppression. I could go on and on about events I never learned about. There is so much. I'll just leave you with one more I personally felt to be the worst example. Why did I never hear about the only successful coup d'etat on American soil? In 1898, a white supremacist mob overthrew a rightfully elected biracial government in Wilmington, North Carolina, with no consequence. No prosecution, just chasing Black voters from the city and not having a single Black office holder for nearly a century. Our country allowed a small group of people to actually overturn the will of the people. Sound familiar? We'll get to that later. There really is a simple reason not to teach this stuff. If you don't tell people about the past, you don't have to own up to the past. The people who are not harmed by the trauma you invoked won't do anything about the problem if they don't know it exists. Hardly anyone will outright deny that slavery or segregation never happened, but you will often hear that it was bad before, but we don't do that anymore, so there isn't anything to fix. If I had leftovers in the fridge and you ate my leftovers, I would expect you to get me food in return. Those were my leftovers, and I wanted to eat them for lunch. But you could just say that, yes, you did eat my leftovers, but you're not eating my leftovers right now, so you don't need to do anything about it. Even if it were true that you weren't eating my leftovers right now, I still don't have anything to eat for lunch. And if you hide the fact that you ate my leftovers from everyone around us, I'm never going to get my lunch. And more importantly, you don't have to make sure I do get my lunch. So it makes sense why legislators would want to prevent youth from learning about the things that happened before. If they don't know about what our country did and its consequences today, they don't need to do anything to repair all of the damage they did before. Once you convince kids that the worst day in America is better than the best day in any other country, or that America is this big melting pot where every culture is equal to one another, the kids won't pipe up about problems they see in their communities when they grow up. The current attacks on critical race theory show that these lawmakers have not set foot in a classroom. First of all, the term critical race theory is actually taught at the collegiate level, mostly in graduate school. Critical race theory is the idea that racism is built into the way our government and society operates. It doesn't take a genius to be able to see this. Racism was built into our Constitution. First, enslaved populations were only counted as 3/5 of their actual population to benefit the people enslaving them. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, but still allows it as punishment for a crime. In turn, Black populations, the formerly formally enslaved, are now incarcerated at higher rates. You probably buy from places that use modern-day slave labor. I'm sure you buy from Target, whose manufacturers use prison labor for their products. This is a basic example of how our society still benefits from racism. More Black people being incarcerated means you get dirt cheap prices at the store. And you probably didn't even know. Obviously, critical race theory can go far more in depth than this, but since I was not taught critical race theory in school, I don't know as much as I would like to. Lawmakers keep using the words critical race theory to describe teaching history. I don't know about you, but I was never ever taught in a classroom that racism was baked into our systems of government. Not once. So why ban it? Because people are learning. People like myself who never knew what happened before know now. People know about Tulsa. People are finally taking education into their own hands because they know the system is designed not to tell them about the events that put us where we are now. So they ban the content from schools. They punish teachers for daring to teach facts. They demand that both sides have a chance to speak, even when the sides are minorities versus racists. So let's go back to Wilmington. Trying to overthrow a fairly elected government? Sound familiar? Part of me worries about how they will teach the events of January 6th in 10, 20, 100 years. Will we be forced to engage in this both sides garbage when one was clearly in the wrong? Will it be a blip in a history textbook drowned out by the events of 2020? If so, then what about Black Lives Matter? Will their protests be seen as the battles or the massacres? If their demands are met, will we conveniently all agree that they were in the right, like the civil rights movement, so we can pretend there will not still be people alive who vehemently opposed it? Or will we allow all of it to fade into the background, hidden behind a wall or a great leader who made the country great again? If you can't imagine everything we have witnessed in the past year not being discussed in our classrooms, I promise you these legislators can. And if we allow our history to be replaced by a bunch of America First nonsense, we will be stuck in the same loop we have been in since 1619.